As a child, like many of my friends, Halloween was my favorite holiday. Not only do you get to dress up as your favorite character, but you also get to walk around and get free candy. Things changed though, on the Halloween that came when I was only 11 years old. After that, I loved the holiday for the movies rather than the social aspect of it. You see, when I was growing up, the town that I lived in had a local orchard and pumpkin patch that would host a festival that would last the back half of October. For the most part, it was always a fun time. They had hay rides, games, pumpkin picking, and even a haunted corn maze. It was honestly one of the only cool things that my town did on a yearly basis. The best part of the festival was, of course, the last day of October, Halloween. That night, everyone wore costumes, and the orchard would run special sales and give out some free hot cider. It was hands down the most festive part of the season. That year I was dressed up as Leon from Resident Evil 4, and I couldn't have been happier with my costume. My family and I arrived at the orchard, and we all immediately split up. My dad went with my little sister to check out the petting zoo that they had, and my mom took my older two brothers and me over to the games to play around for a bit. The plan was for all of us to meet back up in time for the hayride, but before then, it was essentially a free-for-all. I was in awe as I walked around looking at all the costumes that people were wearing. There were some really cool ones, like the Flash and the other superheroes. And then there were some really creepy costumes that I tried to stay away from, like the clowns, or the giant spider costumes that someone was wearing. Surprisingly enough though, those weren't the scariest parts of that night for me. You see, it started when we were playing the festival games. We were at the booth where you need to throw the ball and knock down the stack of plastic pins, and it was my brother's turn to go, so I was basically just spending my time looking around at the different people and seeing if I could recognize anyone. That was when I first noticed him. There was an adult who was standing on the other side of the pathway near the restrooms. He was wearing a Michael Myers mask, and for some reason, it felt like he was staring right at me. I tried to point him out to my mother, but when she looked over, she told me that he was probably just waiting for his kids to come out of the bathroom. That sounded logical to me, so I stopped focusing on him and continued enjoying the festival. And after about 20 minutes of playing some games, we finally met up with my dad and little sister so that we could make it onto the hayride before things got too busy. We still ended up waiting in line, but it was only about a 5-minute wait. Sure enough, we all loaded onto a large carriage that was filled with hay bales to sit on and be pulled around by a large tractor. The hayride was typically a ton of fun because they would have workers in costumes scattered along the path that it would take, and their jobs were to scare us. That year didn't disappoint me. At least 3 times throughout the ride, I genuinely got scared, and by the time we had finished, my blood was surely pumping. And after that, there was only one thing left for me and my brothers to do: the haunted corn maze. We told our parents that we wanted to do it before leaving, and they reluctantly agreed since my sister was getting tired and they wanted to go home. But eventually, we were able to convince them. My dad told us as soon as we finished, we were to go straight to the car and where they would be waiting for us. And as soon as we got the okay, we all made a sprint for the corn maze. By this point though, the maze was packed, and it was hard to keep track of where we were and who was who as we tried to make our way through it. I figured everything would be alright though. Little did I know, I was putting myself in a very bad situation. As I navigated my way through the maze, I eventually hit a dead end, and when I turned around, I realized that I had lost track of my siblings. And if that wasn't bad enough, as I looked around the crowded maze for my 2 brothers, I noticed that I was being watched again. I was stopped dead in my tracks as I looked back through the maze and noticed that same adult in the Michael Myers costume looking directly at me. I began panicking as the man appeared to start walking toward me. I ended up turning around and running in the opposite direction. I continued to look over my shoulder as I tried to make my way through the maze, and I could tell that the man had begun moving faster and faster. And right as I was really about to start freaking out, I accidentally ran into someone. After bumping into this older woman, she turned to ask me if I was okay, and at that point, I was too afraid to get the words out, and I'm pretty sure she knew it. She told me that she was going to help me find my family, and for some reason, I trusted her. The woman helped me get out of the maze where I saw my brothers waiting for me. I explained what happened, and they thought I had just freaked myself out. The three of us made our way to our dad's car and got ready to head home. But as we were pulling out of the parking lot, I couldn't help but look back. To my horror, the man in the Michael Myers mask was actually standing in the entranceway, looking around the parking lot as if he was looking for me. I realized how close I was to being kidnapped the next day when the big news all over town was that a kid had gone missing from the Halloween festival. I told my parents what happened to me, and we made a statement to the police. But as far as I'm aware, they never found the child or his kidnapper. Growing up in Chicago, you always hear about shootings, but you never expect to become the victim of one, especially not on your favorite holiday. But if there's something to learn from this, I hope it's that you always keep aware of your surroundings. You see, it was Halloween of 2013, and I was invited by my friend Peter to a party that they were having at one of the bars that we like to go to on our days off. It usually wasn't too packed with people, but on this occasion, it was the total opposite. As soon as we showed up, I wondered if we'd bitten off more than we could chew. Lucky for us, we got inside and the party ended up being a ton of fun at first. We both grabbed a couple of drinks and began socializing with people that we knew. The lights were awesome and the Halloween decorations were really well done. All in all, I started off having a really good time. That is until all of our attention was taken away from one another and turned toward the middle of what was supposed to be the dance floor. It wasn't clear exactly what was going on, but something had caused the band to stop playing music and the owner to turn the lights of the bar on. Sure enough, we both saw a couple of security guards making their way through the sea of people toward the center of the crowd, where it was now clear that a fight had broken out. We didn't really know the specifics, but all I saw was the security guards dragging one of the men out of the club, and he did not look like he was willing to go. He was kicking and fighting, trying to break free. He was also yelling some things that I couldn't quite understand over the music that had once again started up. I'll admit, after that incident, I felt a bit uneasy about staying at the bar. So after a moment, I began walking around looking for Peter, and when I found him, I let him know that I was going to catch a taxi home. He didn't like that I was leaving early, but he ultimately was cool with it. So I said my goodbyes to everyone and began making my way outside. The air was cold when I stepped from the inside of the club out onto the sidewalk, and I immediately began looking for any sign of a cab to take me to my apartment. That was when I noticed there had been one right down the road, so I figured I would see if they were available. I began walking down the sidewalk, and as I got away from the door, I noticed that there was a man smoking a cigarette against the side of the building. I couldn't be sure, but judging by the blood running down his face, I would say that he was one of the guys who had gotten into the fight. I made sure to keep to myself, in hopes to not starting any conflict or bothering an already upset and inebriated person. But sadly, that wasn't enough. It wasn't the man who was smoking's fault, but as I passed by him on the sidewalk, all that could be heard were the sounds of tires screeching, followed by 4 gunshots. As soon as the event was over, I knew that a drive-by shooting just occurred, and I began looking around to see where it took place. To my surprise, the man who had been smoking a cigarette was now keeled over, clutching at the side of his leg. And that was when I realized that the shooting happened right where I was standing. I looked down and noticed blood was starting to come from the shirt I was wearing, and I began feeling a burning sensation right below the left of my ribcage. I dropped to the floor thinking that my life was ending. But lucky for me and the other man, the bouncers right inside the door of the bar had heard the shots. They called 911 and they came outside and helped keep pressure on our wounds as we both lay there helplessly. At the end of the day, the police never found the shooter, but they were certain that it had to do with the fight that had broken out in the bar moments beforehand. It turned out that the other man who had gotten shot was involved in a gang, and because he wouldn't say who he was fighting with, and I didn't see anything, whoever shot us just got away with it. Our first Halloween in our new home was something that my girlfriend and I had been looking forward to. We had never lived in a suburb before, and therefore didn't usually get many trick-or-treaters. So we were excited to give out candy and see all of the costumes while we sat at home eating some candy ourselves and watching classic horror films. The night went great, and we honestly had more visitors to our door than we had initially expected. And by around 8 o'clock, we were out of candy. So we did what we were always taught growing up, and we turned out the porch light. This seemed to get the message across that we were out of candy, because for a few hours after that, we hadn't received any visitors. That is, not until we were getting ready for bed. It was around 11:30, and we had just finished watching Jeepers Creepers. And by that point, we were pretty tired, so we had decided to turn in. The two of us made our way down the hallway and toward our bedroom, and just as I was about to lay down, I heard a knock at the door. My girlfriend looked at me, and I just told her that they would probably go away if we didn't answer. That was when we heard the sound of knocking again, only this time it seemed a bit louder. I decided that I should check it out, and I began making my way down the hall when I heard whoever it was at the door the third time, and this time I could hear them yell out, "Trick or treat," afterward. The strange thing was their voice didn't sound like children. It almost sounded like young adults at the door. So to be safe, instead of opening it, as I approached the door, I simply yelled out, "I'm sorry, we're all out of candy. I hope you have a good night," and thought they would just leave it. Boy, was I wrong. Out of nowhere, the knocking on the door turned into banging, and before I could even react, my girlfriend came running down the hallway yelling at me that she had seen someone trying to look into our bedroom window. I told her right away to call the police. As the loud banging on the door continued, I looked down at the lock to make sure it was secure, and then I began running toward the other door toward the back of the house to make sure that it was locked as well. I'm glad I did, because as I got to the door, I could see the doorknob moving as if someone were trying to open it. I yelled to whoever it was outside my house that the police were on their way, in hopes that my girlfriend had gotten a hold of them. Suddenly, all of the banging and slamming stopped, and there was silence outside of the house. I could hear the phone call from the other room and was reassured that police were in fact on their way. I walked toward the front of the door and began listening for anything that I could hear outside. When out of nowhere, I heard the sound of glass shattering as a large stone was thrown through our living room window. I ran right over to the window and looked outside, and I was able to see what looked like 3 grown men in various masks running toward the end of my driveway. I yelled out that the police are on their way, to which I was surprised that one of the men replied, "Don't worry, we'll see you soon." By the time the police arrived, all 3 of the men were gone, and they weren't anywhere to be found around the neighborhood. Thankfully, they never came through on their threat, and we never saw those 3 people again.